The unspeakable things masters did to slaves in ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt often sparks thoughts of pyramids, mummies, and mysteries. But there's a hidden and scary story beneath it all, the cruel treatment of slaves. This is not a story about pharaohs or gods. It's about those who suffered in silence, the slaves in ancient Egypt. This is a part of history that doesn't often get told. The horrifying punishments that slaves in ancient Egypt had to bear were not random or rare. They were part of daily life for slaves. Today's video takes a hard look at the dark side of life in ancient Egypt, shedding light on some of those brutal punishments. To understand the tough life of slaves in ancient Egypt, we need to look at how things were back then, between 3150 BC and 30 BC. In those days, you didn't get to choose what you wanted to do. If you were born a slave, you stayed a slave. It was like being the bottom of a really tall ladder that you can't climb. The rich and powerful people made the rules and everyone else had to follow them. If you broke the rules, you could be badly hurt. This was more about making people scared and keeping them in line than about right or wrong. Being a slave in ancient Egypt thus meant living with fear and never getting to make your own choices. Turning our gaze to the harsh realities of slavery in ancient Egypt, we first meet the hard life of forced labour. Around 1500 BC, a lot of people were slaves, and they were made to work really hard in different places. In the fields, they worked long hours under the hot sun, growing crops with basic tools. In stone quarries, they were made to work hard, taking out stone that was later used to make the big buildings we admire today. They also worked at construction sites, lifting heavy stones to build pyramids and temples. Some reports suggest that nearly 1/3 of Egypt's people might have been doing this kind of tough work. On top of all this, the slaves lived in very bad conditions. They lived in small huts with not enough clean water or good toilets. They often got sick and didn't have enough food. Many died young, with most not living past the age of 30. This hard work and poor living conditions was a daily reality for slaves in ancient Egypt, revealing a sad and dark part of its rich history. Historical records from around 1250 BC tell a chilling tale of how slave owners liberally wielded whips against their slaves. The whips, often embedded with bits of metal or bone, were not merely instruments of discipline, but weapons that resulted in deep, lasting wounds. One such account tells of a slave in a quarry who, after a moment of rest, was met with relentless hail of lashes that left him bloody and bruised. This brutal treatment wasn't solely about causing physical suffering, it was an intentional strategy to shatter the will of the enslaved, making them more compliant. Impalement and dismemberment were not ordinary punishments, but extreme measures reserved for what were considered the gravest offences. For instance, a slave attempting to revolt or escape could face such a gruesome fate. Impalement, a horrific execution method, involved forcefully inserting a stake through the victim's body, causing agonising and prolonged suffering. Dismemberment was equally gruesome, involving the cutting off of limbs. Both punishments were designed to be public spectacles, serving as warnings to other slaves. Historical texts like the Stela of Ra from around 2000 BC describe such punishments. The psychological impact of witnessing or enduring such extreme forms of punishment would have been immense, leaving likely survivors in constant fear. Branding and tattooing were not merely body modifications, but a punishment designed to identify and degrade those in servitude. It was another painful reality slaves had to endure. Branding involved burning the skin with hot metal, leaving permanent scars. Tattooing, while less painful physically, still carried a strong social stigma. The symbols used often signified a slave's status or any transgressions they had committed. Slaves who attempted to escape, for example, might be branded with symbols of flight or rebellion. The aftermath of these procedures was twofold. Physically, slaves had to endure the pain of the process and the risk of infection. Socially, these marks served as a constant reminder of their lowly status, contributing to feelings of shame and ostracism. In ancient Egypt, hair carried a deep cultural significance, a fact that brings us to yet another form of punishment meted out to slaves, the shaving of the head and beard. Hair in this ancient society was not merely a physical attribute, but a powerful symbol of one's identity, status, and even religious beliefs. Therefore, possessing well-groomed hair and a styled beard was a matter of pride, especially for men. The forced shaving of a slave's head and beard as a punishment that served as a common form of humiliation and disgrace. This act stripped slaves of their individuality and reduced their social standing further. Such a punishment could be inflicted for various reasons, such as an attempt to escape, theft, or merely as a show of power by the master. The impact of this punishment was deep and far-reaching. On a personal level, it served as a constant, visible reminder of their enslavement, which could have a profound psychological impact. Sexual exploitation stands out as a particularly harrowing aspect. Slaves, both male and female, were often subject to sexual abuse and exploitation by their masters. This was a reality of their lives, an awful form of oppression that left deep psychological scars. Sexual exploitation of slaves was an extension of the absolute power masters held over them, further dehumanizing and violating their basic rights. This form of abuse was not strictly punitive, but was primarily about exercising control and dominance. One particular account comes from a tale engraved on a papyrus from the New Kingdom period during the 1550 to 1070 BC. It tells the story of a slave girl named Shen, who was repeatedly sexually abused by her master. Despite her pleas for help, her cries fell on deaf ears as she had no legal recourse or protection. Then there's the account of a male slave, Nen, who faced similar exploitation. He was a slave in the house of a very powerful man. This master did not treat Nen well. According to inscriptions found on the limestone stele, Nen was frequently subjected to his master's unwanted advances, making his life miserable. These narratives of sexual exploitation weren't isolated incidents, but part of a broader systemic issue. Such practices undoubtedly had devastating impacts on the mental and emotional well-being of the slaves, instilling in them a sense of fear and helplessness. Egypt's treatment of slaves was not only marked by physical and psychological torment, but it also included the ultimate punishment: death. Capital punishment in ancient Egypt came in various forms and was used as the harshest form of discipline against slaves. This penalty was generally reserved for what was considered serious crimes, such as conspiracy against the master, murder, or attempted escape. One terrifying form of capital punishment was execution by beheading, a swift yet gruesome method. Another was burning, a slow and torturous process that served as a public spectacle and a warning to other slaves. Additionally, there was also death by impalement and crucifixion, where the sentenced person was nailed or tied to a wooden cross and left to die. The choice of the method often depended on the nature of the crime committed and the message the authorities wanted to send to the populace. For instance, a traitor might be burned alive in public to demonstrate the extreme consequences of rebellion, whereas a murderer might face beheading. This extreme form of punishment was not just a tool to maintain control over slaves, but also a statement of power, sending a clear message that disobedience would not be tolerated. This chilling journey compels us to reflect what untold stories of hardship and resilience still lie buried in the sands of Egypt's vast deserts. That wraps up today's video. Remember to hit subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and share our channel for more engaging content. See you soon in another captivating video.